Liturgy, and now we are going to hear from Connie Campbell-Pearson. Connie was ordained in 2014. She's very active in creating tiny houses for the homeless and is the director of the School for Deacons in Montana. She serves as the organist in not one, not two, but 3 churches. And at this point, I would turn it over to Connie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carter, and thank you all for being here. I'm going to be the last speaker following 2 great talks. Really have great respect for those that have already shared. And how do you actually be a deacon and stay connected to God when you're really out doing a lot of work? And that was kind of what I felt like Carter was asking me to talk about. So first of all, one of the translations I ran across for 1 Thessalonians 5:17 says, your life is a prayer. How do we pray without ceasing and make our life a prayer? Because I find that for myself in prayer, I don't have the ability, the desire to sit down and take long periods to be in prayer. I got to get up. I got to start going. I feel like God's put things on my heart and I want to get moving, but I also want to stay totally connected to the Lord. And one thing that I did before I was ever a deacon was in the, it must have been around in the 1980s, I made a decision in my life that I was going to tithe my time in prayer. And, if you really tithed your time in prayer out of a 24-hour period, you'd be doing 2.5 hours of prayer every day. But I just decided it would be easier if I would set my watch every hour. And whenever I heard that ding, I would just stop whatever I was doing and take 6 minutes to give gratitude, to slow down, to sit down, to look around the world that I was in and pray, and then just proceed on with whatever I was doing. And that became a habit for me. Now that we have like Apple Watches and all that kind of stuff, you can do that much more easily with setting a timer. I don't need to set a timer anymore. I just simply have decided that things like taking long period of time in the morning for devotions is not my style. I would much rather take a short time in the morning, a short time at noon, a short time in the early evening, and before I go to bed. So I do noontime prayer, I do evening prayer, I do Compline, and I don't do a whole daily office. I do morning prayer, just a very short time of prayer. And sometimes that's even before I even get up, because I feel like one of the scriptures in Isaiah chapter 50 verse 4 says, he wakens me every morning and he digs my ear. And I like to hear what God has to say to me first thing in the morning. Sometimes even hearing God when I'm dreaming at night, I'll wake up and write things down on a piece of paper that I have next to me so that I can remember what it is that I feel like God is saying to me in the night. Because as you get older, for many of us will attest that you do have a few more times when you wake up in the night. And there are times when you really need to listen. What is it that I'm supposed to be hearing? And seems to me, that's when I wrestle the most with what are the situations in my life or in my ministry. I've found that for prayer, I have to be brutally honest with God, or I am not going to get anywhere in my work or in my life. And I know that God can handle whatever it is that I'm saying. So prayer is my ability to be able to say, I really can't do this, God, or I really need some help on this, or I really don't like that person. And most of the time, what God's trying to say to me is, I want you, when you look at people, to see them as I see them. see that when I look at a person, I try to be thinking about God looking back at me through those beautiful eyes, whether they're brown or blue or green or black, whatever color they are, that really that's the image of God that's looking at me. And that helps me in my ministry when I begin to think about how I want to engage my community. So Carter said that what I do is I build tiny houses for homeless people. And actually what this is it's now into its 6th year of what we're calling here in Montana the Tiny House Project, or a housing first village, where we're making an attempt to take and bring the services that the homeless need all into one location, like a village, not just providing housing and then walking away, but being able to case manage, being able to provide medical services, health services, alcohol and drug, job services, those kinds of things. And so when it all started, I have to say God was really in it from the very beginning, because I certainly didn't. I had worked a lot with the homeless. I'd done things like feed the hungry. We needed a shower program for the homeless because you can't get a job if you're dirty, those kinds of things. And so we were managing all those things, but we hadn't even come across any kind of idea other than just a shelter. And here where I live in Bozeman, it's a major community in Montana, but we didn't have a year-round warming shelter, but we still have snow on the ground when our warming shelter is closed. So it was every year we would have this homeless memorial where we would remember the people who had frozen to death in the year because they were exposed to the elements. And believe me, it's heartbreaking. This last year alone, we had 8 people who froze to death in the park, sleeping on the park because a sudden snowstorm hit them or something like that. So this project is really near and dear to my heart, and we put our first people into tiny homes this December. And how did it happen? Well, I just started talking to people, but mostly what I did was I tried to get partners. If somebody could mute that, thank you, that would be helpful. I tried to get partners in the community, not just church partners, but we have a university here in Bozeman, and I went to the architecture department and said, if we were going to design something, what could we design that would be suitable, would be livable, and would be trauma informed, that would help people be able to be safe and secure and not have to defend themselves and not freeze to death at night, and be able to take a shower and get ready to go to a job if that was something that they were able to do. And we did a lot of researching with a lot of different communities. And one of the things that I just said we had to have was we had to have a bathroom, which as soon as you add water to any kind of a tiny house, you really are increasing the cost enormously. But it was just necessary. I just said, okay, I'm a woman. I don't want to get up in the middle of the night and have to go to a bank of porta potties or some kind of a community bathroom. I just said, this is where I draw my line, and this is what we have to have. So even though only about 20% of our homeless people here are women, it was enough that it was, for me, it was just like, we're not going to do this if we don't have bathrooms in these tiny houses. And so a state entity like a state university and a church, they can't have a contract together because of the state and church issue. And so we ended up bringing in the social service network in our community, and they acted as the middle person. And so between the three of us, we had this really well-oiled machine that was going forward. And I'll just tell you, God was in it. It was the right time for it. The first time I went to a meeting and just shared the idea of having tiny houses for homeless people, a woman walked up with a $10,000 check to pay for one of the houses. And the ball just got rolling from there. I started talking to churches. I started talking to people. We gave tours of our homeless shelter. We talked a lot about what we envisioned. We did studies. We collected a lot of data because some of the things, when you try to bring all of your shareholders together, you're going to have a lot of people who they're not really interested in the moral reasons for why we need to house our homeless people. But if you can talk to them from a financial perspective, you actually can win the day. And I think that's really what's happened. The whole community has gotten behind this project because what we were able to show basically was, here is the cost of what this community is paying for every homeless person in terms of law enforcement, social services, healthcare, costs at the hospital, ambulances, all those kinds of things. We rolled all that into one pile and said, okay, this is what it costs our community, the taxpayer. And then we housed people and we didn't change anything else. We said, okay, here's what it costs if the only thing that you change is simply you put them in housing. You don't fix their addiction. You don't fix them getting a job. You don't get them counseling. Nothing changes except you give them housing first. And the cost was dramatically reduced, over 60%. And when you can go to your community with those kinds of data figures, you have a leg to stand on because you get the attention of your city council, you get the attention of your county commissioners, and most of all, you get the attention of big donors who actually say, well, you know, really for $60,000, we can get a house put together with utilities and buy the land and all of that stuff. And yes, it can save the community a lot of money. So those were all the kinds of things that we did. I included the homeless people in on the very beginning when we wanted to start planning for what they felt like they needed. Homeless people were on the first shareholder meetings, when we met with the university, when we met with the city engineers, when we met to start beginning to get an idea of what exactly was it that we were trying to do and build in a community. And their input was invaluable. They told us a lot of things about their lifestyle, about what it was that would help them the most. And some of the things were, you know, we don't really need a kitchen in a tiny house. We're not going to do any cooking. We just need to be able to make coffee and toast and heat something in a microwave. And that was really quite true. We didn't need to add a kitchen, and adding a kitchen would have doubled the size of our houses anyway, because of just the way city statutes are and building codes. So I think finding out what your homeless people really feel like will benefit them. Some things were, we did a trauma-informed design, which meant that we made really high ceilings, like 13-foot ceilings. So they're on a shed like this. So it's 8 foot on one end and 13 on the other. And we put like 7 to 10 windows in every one of them, high up windows. So tons and tons and tons of natural light. And no door opens onto somebody else's door. They're all completely self-contained with their shower, bathroom, and their little living area. And no house is more than 150 square feet, which if you look at what 150 square feet is, that's not too much more than a hotel room. That's basically what we did. Was we ended up creating these little individual hotel rooms for people. So we just figured out how to include the people that were going to be served. We let's see, I'm just trying to look at my notes here because I really kind of wanted to get back to the idea about the prayer. And because Carter wanted me to say, okay, so now, Martha, how is it that you're making your life a prayer? Well, I think about the fact that when God created creation, he gave everything the ability to create itself. You know, trees reproduce themselves by dropping pine cones and acorns and all those kinds of things. And plants grow and reproduce themselves, especially the ones that you don't want, like crabgrass and some of that stuff. Animals create more animals, and people create more life. I think it's all about the fact that the world, even though God created it all, we're invited to be part of the ongoing creation of the world. And that's the energy that Jesus taps into when he begins to pray, even in the garden. He says, you know, I really wish, God, there was another way out of this path that you have for me. But if it's not, then I'll go wherever you want me to go. And that's exactly what we do as deacons. We say, yes, God, we're going to go wherever you want us to go and do whatever you want us to. I had no idea when I started as a deacon that I would end up working with homeless people. I'm a lesbian, and I really felt like my whole life work was going to be given to doing legislative action and advocacy for LGBTQIA plus people. And before I was even ordained, all of those federal courts turned over and it suddenly became legal. And I thought, what the heck am I doing here, God? Why do you have me here? I've been training for this all my life. And now you're asking me to be completely unhooked from what I thought was going to be my mission. So, you know, I just feel like part of what we have to do is, in that honesty with God, is just be able to allow the onus of responsibility for God to communicate with me, that he's going to do whatever it takes for me to hear what he has to say. And in my case, it happened to be a $10,000 check. That was a real big speaking of God. It was loud. It was awesome. And when I walked into the city planning offices the first time to just find out what kind of building codes we even had in Bozeman, whether or not we could actually do tiny houses that were 150 square feet, I no sooner left that man's office when he sent an aide running after me, and he said, I think there's somebody here that you need to meet. And when I came back into his office, he said, this is the man who's the head of the architecture department at Montana State University. And it turned out that as I talked to him about what I wanted to do, he said, well, I have graduate students that would love to do a project like this. And within 2 weeks, there was a class being formed at the university, and 12 students signed up for it. And they've had now over the last 6 years, there's been a class every single semester that's been focusing on how to meet the needs of the homeless, and all kinds of ideas being generated. People going to visit homeless shelters in Austin, in Seattle, in Oregon, all over the country where we've had these housing first villages, because they all are based on the needs of the community there. And I'm just grateful that something happened here. It's an idea that's actually replicable and could be used anywhere. So I don't know, Carter, how does that seem to you? I just don't want you to feel guilty about being busy. If what you're doing is life-giving, you're in the right place. If it's sucking the life out of you, you should maybe think about quitting it. And and being busy is okay. I'm on the move all the time, and that's that's part of being able to play an organ in 3 different churches on Sunday. Believe me, Sunday is not a day of real big worship for me. I'm just on the move all the time, but there's other places where God gives back to me. And that's when it's really God, he'll give you strength sufficient for the day.
Thank you.
So I'm open for questions here.
So what I would suggest that we do is what we have done for the other sessions. I will watch the queue if people would raise their hand if they want to ask questions. We will be breaking at 5:15 and then coming back at 5:40 for worship. And I hope you can make it, because I'm really excited about the closing worship. And I got a question in chat. One of the questions was, would you be willing to share your contact information in a roster when I send it out with everyone?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Got that one taken care of. And how did you acquire land, and how did you do the logistics of the land part?
Oh, well, so my first idea was almost every city has got little bits and dabs of land that are on your cities have 50-year and 100-year strategic plans. If you don't know that, most cities do. And they've got little bits and dabs of pieces of land all around their city that are earmarked for something at a later date. And so my first idea was, could we lease some of that land for $1 a year? And we were going to make the houses portable, something that you could either put on wheels or that you could carry somewhere else when we were done. But in the end, we have a thing called NAMI, not in my backyard, that people don't want to have something. They're all for it, but don't put it where I can see it. So we did look at a couple of old landfill sites. In the end, we were able to get a piece of property that was had been farmland, and it's right kind of on the edge of town. It's on the other side of the train tracks, literally. And we were able to get 5.5 acres that we could put the whole Housing First Village on. So we ended up having to purchase land, but we've had a campaign. Our campaign has been a $15 million campaign. 10 million has already been raised, and the last 5 million we're working on. We just went public last month to raise the last 5 million, and already 2.5 million has come in. So, and that was jump started by a wealthy donor who gave $2 million, and his ex-wife challenged him. She said, I'm going to give $2 million to this project. Will you give 2 million? And between the two of them, they gave $4 million to get the project started. So, wow. Yeah.
That's great. David Powell.
Thank you. Having worked for a homeless population in Southern Arizona for 8 years as a property manager, I really can relate to the personalities and the challenges that you are associated with there in Montana. I guess instead of a question, I just like to respond to your being honest with your prayer life with God, and also your statement of utilizing the daily offices daily. It's a new practice I'm going to attempt. I've done them off and on, but daily, that's why they're called daily offices, I guess. So I really appreciated those 2 points.
David, I don't do the full morning prayer or evening prayer. I go with the shorter family versions, or you can, Celtic prayer has got, you can find books, even that there's a book that the church puts out. It's called Hour by Hour, and it has morning, but not full on morning daily office. It's the morning, noon, evening, and nighttime. And those are shorter. They just take a few minutes, and you can be on your way.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Lynn Nickens.
Hi, thank you so much for that information. I just wanted to share, my church is actually looking into using our property, some of our property, for these small houses for the homeless kind of in our area and all of that. And I would be wondering if you'd be interested in sending this information, or are having someone from the vestry or our priest get in contact, because it's right on the same page. And if this can be reputable, that would be fabulous.
Right. I mean, we have case management that's happening, and the church is not managing that. The social network, the social services is doing that. They really have stepped up and done most of the fundraising and most of the case management. But, you know, the faith community got behind the whole project. And so really in the long term, there will be appointed a board of directors who have fiduciary responsibility for the tiny house village. But it will have stakeholders from the homeless population there. And my final goal would be to have some kind of cottage industry in the housing first village that enables it to support itself. But right now we're requiring that residents pay a third of their income for the housing, which if you don't have anything, you don't pay anything. But most people do have SSI or some kind of disability. And so they have to be, and really what can they have in their house? Well, they can have anything you can have in your house. If they want a pet, or even if they want to have alcohol, they can. You know, the main thing is we won't let them break the law. So no meth labs or anything like that. I say that jokingly, kind of, but they can't break the law in the houses. But we also we're not trying to limit them from anything that you or I would be able to do in our own home.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Christina Burbank.
Just a quick thought about prayer. Several times in the last few minutes, we've mentioned the daily devotions, morning, noon, evening, and night. I have those set to music. And I know that I find for myself that music is sort of like, chewing gum and walking at the same time. I can actually meditate and work at the same time. I can sort of have a Mary Martha moment when I've got some music running through my mind and through my heart. So I just offer those up if anybody would be interested in listening to those, giving them a try. I guess we'll have each other's contact information at the end of the session. Thank you.
And is this something, Christina, that you wrote? And
Yes. As a deacon, I wrote them, and then I've had them professionally recorded. So the notes on the page are mine, but the voices is someone that you'd much rather listen to.
Thank you. I got a question in the chat about, Connie, can you talk about your legislative advocacy experience?
I never got to it because it all became legal. So I didn't have to go to battle for anything. I ended up being able to get married for the first time in my life, and it's changed my life. So, but I still would, in our advocacy for other things, we do legislative advocacy. Our legislature only meets once every 2 years for 90 days. And so we have to really be prepared as churches to know what it is that we're going to actually go and advocate for. And so we generally try to keep it to 2 or 3 things. I think really one of the big advocacies this year, as our legislature meets next year in 2023, will be for the climate. We're just desperate that there be some kind of acknowledgement for climate change and some kind of responsibility, and that we would stop mining coal and doing the things that we're doing. So that'll be the kind of advocacy I'm entering into legislatively, will be for climate.
Thank you. Connie or Julie Lytle put into chat for me, and I will share with everyone. Would you like to explain what the event is that she was at? Julie?
Deacons Talking is the monthly webinar that we do for deacons across the church. And Connie was kind enough to go through pictures and stories of the whole process, similar and expanded upon what she just did. I put a link to the recording of that program. So if any of you want to be sharing it with your locations in terms of resources of ways to replicate this, it's got great information.
Thank you, Julie.
And I will include all of these things in the follow-up email that we send out. And if for whatever reason, all of my commitments to send things out fall short, please email me and remind me that I said I was going to do something, and I will track it down. Connie, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank you. You did exactly what I was hoping, talking about what deacons do out in the world and how we do it without, like Martha, becoming distracted by many things. The problem isn't being busy. The problem is not being grounded. So I think you have expressed a very groundedness in what you do. And the near tears indicate that your heart is in it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Carter.